with the internet speed and other potential connectivity issues. So let's just get started.
All right. So we will be recording today. It's going to take a few weeks for the transcriptions to come through and for it to be uploaded to YouTube. So once that is available, if you would like the link, feel free to reach out. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and we will answer those at the end of the session after the recording has been stopped. We will provide the handout after the session, and along with the continuing education credits. You'll have to fill out the survey at the end in order to get that. And then if you want to turn on captions, all you need to do is click on More, those three dots in the up where it says chat, people, raise hand, click More right there in the center. And then go to language and speech and turn on live captions. Okay. All right, so we'll be talking about what do you need to do when you have a student with a visual disability, or maybe a parent or guardian who has a visual disability. What are those barriers that come into play? And then how do you enact simple changes that can remove those barriers? So first, let's talk about what is accessibility. We've been talking about this and we'll continue to talk about it throughout these sessions. It is the quality of being easy to reach or be used by someone with a disability. And we know that everyone can use and easily use things that are made in a way that are simple to use, right? So curb cuts, for example. Somebody who uses a wheelchair for mobility will have a really difficult time, or maybe impossible time, getting on the sidewalk if there's no curb cut for them to access the sidewalk. Same thing applies to digital accessibility. This way of designing our digital materials is how we make it easy for people with disabilities, and really all of us, to access those digital materials.
So we're going to try to focus today a little bit more than usual on visual disabilities, as this is kind of a very important topic. So with that in mind, what are visual disabilities? So if we want to talk about the three main categories that maybe everybody's hopefully familiar with, we have blindness, color blindness, which is not as familiar for folks, and then we have low vision. And the important things to remember here is that aside from labels and categories and those type of things, we have to consider the fact that everybody is different. Everybody's perception is different. Everybody's going to have different needs, even if they have the same diagnosed disability. in the area of vision, right? So although we are addressing categories of needs today, and ways to remove barriers for those categories, you want to keep in mind that everybody's different. So you have to adjust to that when you're looking at putting things in place for your students, or um, even adults that are in your environment, whatever that is. So, speaking of barriers to vision, we like to kind of take some time to allow participants to tell us what they think about an example like this one. Would this be something that is easy to access? And again, we're looking today at the vision uh, side of things, but even overall, if you have comments, you can put them in the chat. Just let us know what you think. What would be the barriers? Is this something that's appropriate to use? This would be a flyer you could use tomorrow, or there might be some things you might want to change before you post it. I try to watch the chat. Um, if it's easier to just come off mute, everybody should be able to do that. But yeah, let us know what would be the barriers to access for something like this. If this was a flyer you're using, what would be the challenging parts for somebody that struggles with vision?
So the background
Mhm.
makes it difficult to read some of the text. The white font is hard to see. Very good. No
Too
contrast between the
busy.
text and background.
The text needs
Yes.
more contrast. It's too busy. Absolutely. And that would also be the first thing I notice, the amount of visual clutter, right? That comes with this image, with this flyer. It's meant to be a flyer, but there's so much going on it in terms of visual clutter that it's hard. It makes your brain work extra hard to try to figure out what's background, what's foreground, what's text, where do you look first? What do you decode first, right? And this is not even um, taking into account a potentially, um, you know, difficult issue in the area of vision, a disability, things like that. So we have to take a step back every time we're ready to post something, make something public. We have to take a step back and take a critical look at what it is that we're trying to post and see if it's really ready to go public. In other words, ready for everybody to access, because we don't know oftentimes who's on the receiving end. If it's just something we put out in our classroom, then we know our students, hopefully, unless you have somebody that just came in that day. Um, but if it's something that goes public, if it's something you're pushing out to, um, parents, let's say, if something you're putting on your page, anything that's public facing, you have to be adding extra layers of consideration, right? So let's just try to make that a constant exercise when we put out content.
And some of those barriers you guys already touched on: poor color contrast, um, having images without alt text. Um, One of the issues that we'll touch on briefly, using color coding to provide information. That's a significant barrier, especially if the individual or the user has issues with seeing certain colors. Also, confusing reading order and unreadable fonts. So we'll tackle these issues as well as others. Visual barriers can impact everyone. So think about the amount of light that comes in that reaches the back of the eye. It reduces as a natural part of aging. So also think about conditions like cataracts. Um, it can make your vision cloudy, make things difficult to see. Also, screens vary widely in their sizes, in their pixel resolutions, and you also have to think about the physical size of the screen. A lot of our schools use Chromebooks, and those screens are very small. So when you're creating your presentations, for your classes, think about how small those screens are and be intentional about not cramming too much information on one slide. Also, reading in bright conditions is much harder because that lowers contrast. So choosing to be careful about your background and text color or your background and foreground color is really important. So now we'll go into avoiding visual clutter. How do you do that? Take a look at this picture and tell us a little bit about what you see here. Are these images on this picture easy to see? Would it be easy to explain? What kind of things do you see in this picture that could be distracting? If uh, you had a student who maybe had tunnel vision, would they be able to see each of those blue tiles on in the picture? Yeah, the circular pattern is very distracting. That would be difficult for um, our students who have cognitive issues or cognitive disabilities to focus on what's going on in the picture as opposed to the effects that are laid over top of it. And think about, do you ever put pictures like this in your instructional presentations? We'll talk about that throughout.
And just a quick exercise here, if you would please go back 1 second. Is there anything that is actually a good takeaway from this? Is there something we can use? Yes, the picture has a lot of background clutter. Is there anything positive to take away from this that we can use in the future? There is, and I wanted to point this out, there is an attempt to make those, to create a little bit more contrast between the very distracting background and those individual icons. However, so that would be a positive if they wouldn't be see-through, right? So they do create some additional contrast, but they're see-through. So when you're putting some things in place, keep an eye out for things like this. So the positive is an attempt to create some definite some definition, right? Visually, some definition so you can see those icons easier. So that would be a takeaway when you put your content together. If you have graphics that you have to use, make sure you have sufficient contrast there. And this is one example as to why that's important. Okay.
So since we're talking about images, we need to talk about alternative text. Alt text is the text, the words that provide a meaning to the images that are in your presentations, pictures online. It's not long, so you should be looking for or creating short sentences that describe the images that you're using. No more than 150 characters. Keep it short. Make sure that if there's any relevant content that you're referencing in text that is in the image, that it's also in the alternative text as well. Now that alt text is what is read by screen reading programs for individuals who are blind. And that alt text is the only way that those individuals can interact with images on a computer. So making sure that you have that. It's really easy to find. All you have to do is right click on the image and it pulls up that menu and you can click on alt text. It's the same across Google and Microsoft platforms. It will pull up this box that lets you put in your description of the image. Microsoft has a nifty little checkbox if it's a decorative image. So if it's like a line or an icon or something that doesn't really provide any information to the reader or to the user, then you can mark it as decorative. In Google, the only way to mark it as decorative is to do open quotation mark, close quotation mark. And that will tell the screen reader just to skip the image altogether.
So, supporting text, if you have complex images, as we talked about a minute ago, the amount of content you can input in alt text is limited. So if you find yourself in a position to where you have to do quite an extensive description, you may want to consider other options, and this would be what we call the supporting text. You may have flyers and posters and images and other things that require additional context, and the alt text is simply not going to suffice. The recommendation is, if you are going to provide supporting text, is to take a look at the alt text option and see if you really need both. Typically you don't. So if in that case, you could just check alt text as decorative, and just make sure that your supporting text provides all the information that everybody needs to get. And that's about it. You'll see this a lot with tables, with images that are more complex, with pie charts and graphs and things like that. So take that into account. First of all, if you really need to include that there, and then if you do, is that something that's going to work with just the brief description that alt text provides or not? Typically, it doesn't.
So when we talk about fonts, we want to make sure that they are easy to read. There's no standard font that is easier to read than another. However, there are fonts that are more difficult to read than others. So keep it simple. Uh, I will say Times New Roman is a font that shouldn't be easy to read, but it is because of uh, it's one that everyone is accustomed to reading. So for those individuals who uh, uh, who got an injury to their vision at some point in their like later life or their adult life, they might still be able to read and recognize those letters in Times New Roman because they're accustomed to that font. However, best practice is to make sure that whatever font you use, it's good and thick, that your number one, your capital I, and your lowercase l all look distinct from each other. And don't go crazy with using a different font on every slide or a different font in every section of text. Try to pick, two, maybe three, and stay consistent with how you use those. Like I said, good fonts, they're thick or they're bold looking, easy to read. You want to be careful with your color contrast. So if you choose a lighter background, so like if you have a light pink background, you don't want to have a pink colored font over top of that because that makes it very difficult to see. Um, at least 12-point font on documents and emails, and then not smaller than 32 on presentations. And also, that's something that you can consider your context. If people are going to be at the back of a room and viewing just one screen, then you want to make your font as large as possible. But on situations like we're doing now, in virtual platforms, you can go a little bit smaller because people can increase the size of their screens. So, but I would say don't go below really 28 if you're doing a virtual presentation.
Um, yeah, I wanted to mention that. Thank you for bringing that up. So we don't want anybody to kind of get confused by that. So the recommendation is 32 font size, but if you have to go further down, as in smaller than that, I would say 28 is the very last option you have before that text is really too small for somebody to see it if they're in a room. So there is a little bit of wiggle room there, but not a lot. Descriptive links. We want the links to kind of give us some information about where um, some click would take you, right? And why is that? It's because if we have a screen reader user, um, which to say somebody, typically that's somebody that's legally blind, that cannot see your links and they navigate through the use of a screen reader, they will be able to um, navigate through each link and decide whether or not they want to click on it, depending on what it says. If your link is um, not descriptive, which is to say, as you see an example there, um, a lot of letters and dots and backward slash and this and that. Those are not accessible. You would force somebody who is a screen reader user to sit there and listen through every single one. And then by the end of that read of that link, they would still not be quite sure where that link goes. Chances are they would just give up and just skip the link altogether. And that might be information they need to have. So make sure when you include links that you go the extra step to make them descriptive so that people know where they go. Google makes it fairly easy to do that. If you're in Google Drive, for example, as you know, if you click on a link, it does give you the option to click on it. It just kind of makes it descriptive. Microsoft is doing that. So you have options. I would say if you're in a program that does that automatically for you, you may still want to check that and make sure that it says what you wanted it to say. Before you move on. And also make sure only linked text is underlined. In other words, if you have a title or something you want to put emphasis on because you think it's good content that's important for them to pay attention to, think about doing it, conveying that message that that text is important in other ways. We don't want to underline text that is not a hyperlink because that again creates confusion for somebody that looks at that text and assumes it's a link because most often than not, there's a link there, right? When you see a text that's underlined. So keep these things in mind.
All right, now we'll talk about keeping your content organized. Really, I'm going to talk mainly about presentations here, but all of these things apply to documents as well, just in a little different context. So with your presentations, use templates. Instead of creating a blank slideshow and then adding background to it, use the pre-made templates on each slide. So those usually have like a slide title and content boxes. What that does is it provides screen reader programs with code so that the boxes are read in a specific order. That ensures that your reading order is how you want it to be so that your content is read to the person in the way that makes sense, in the way that you intend it to be read to them. Also using bullets to create lists. That keeps your content organized, it keeps it easy to follow and easy to go back to if they need to listen to it again. Bullets are especially great for people with low vision. They're thick, they're easy to see. So when, say, they might be told, look for a list. Well, when you see bullets, you know, okay, that's a list. Let me go find the nice thick bullets in my text. And that makes it a lot easier to navigate. All right,
So when we consider vocabulary, we have to also think of different opportunities, different ways to access text. This is where assistive technology can come into play. And the benefit is that these days we have built-in options that we can use. Typically, every classroom has a one-to-one device of some sort. And I do have to say, every platform typically offers an option for a built-in screen reader, for text-to-speech, for Zoom text. We'll cover more of that in a little bit. But think of options like text-to-speech. Make those things available, or teach your students that they're there if they already have them available, and what are the instances where they're beneficial. So if you provide one single way of accessing content, and that way does not work for a child, then they're kind of locked in. If you provide multiple ways and multiple options, then we have a better chance of actually accessing that content. So keep that in mind. If you have questions about specifics on certain type of software, text to speech or otherwise, on the assistive technology side of it, let me know. But keep in mind that these things are typically already available in your classroom. If you don't know, ask somebody.
All right. So as we dive into comprehension, one of the parts of comprehension that also ties into our organizational piece is making sure that your slides and your presentations are organized in the way that makes sense. So your slide titles are very important. Um, Imagine if, so this is the order, the reading order pane that you can pull up from PowerPoint. And each of these in the bold white text is the title of the slide. Um, when students who use a screen reader are navigating through slides, what the slide title is the thing that they are going to hear first, and they can either skip that slide and go on to the next one, or just listen to all of the titles at once. Imagine looking for specific information and hearing slides 6 through 9 having the exact same title. That would be very disorienting, and it would take longer for the student to be able to find their information that they need than their peers. So making sure that you have unique slide titles is extremely important. Also, using headings in documents. So the headings break up text into smaller, easier to read chunks. This helps everyone, but specifically those students with visual disabilities. They may have a hard time scanning text for specific information. So breaking it up with headings makes it easier for them to find information. It also works just like the slide titles. Um, Screen readers can read off the headings to the user, and they can find their information just as quickly. Make sure that your headings you use them in logical order. So a heading 1 will be like the very first section on your page. There is an option in Microsoft and in Google for a title, but that's not actually a heading. That doesn't get read off as a title by screen readers. That's actually just the what you name your document. So don't think about title as being part of the document. That's just like the name of the document. So heading 1 should really be what your title would be. And then heading 2 would be a subheading to that, heading 3 just below that. Make sure you use those in logical reading order and don't skip levels. So to get to those headings in Google Docs, you would go to the toolbar across the top, and you'll see where it says normal text. You would click that, and there's a drop-down box that will have all of the different heading styles. You can also modify them, so you can set it to have a certain font, a certain size and color if you want, so that every time it comes up the same. And then in Microsoft, it's the styles bar that goes across the top in the toolbar. It's usually like in the middle of the toolbar. And same way, you can modify those heading styles so that they show up the same way that you want them to every time you use them.
So, what to avoid? Let's try to stay away from the obvious things, right? Things that start playing the moment we get on a page without actively clicking on a video to play. Flashing media of any kind. And also things that maybe are not so obvious, like using emojis in the middle of a sentence. Um, all these things are creating serious barriers for somebody who's using a screen reader, or just for somebody that all of a sudden you click on a page and you're met with a lot of flashing, a lot of sounds, music, whatever's going on in that media that's starting to play the moment you get to that page, right? And also, we've all been there. We've had more than one tab open, and there was that video that we couldn't find that kept playing on its own without us turning that on. So if you're involved in putting this together, this content, please stay away as far away as possible from these things. They're not good for anybody, but especially not for anybody that struggles with vision.
So when you are creating your lessons, especially if you're using PowerPoint or slides, be aware of the screen size uh, that students are using. So especially if they're using Chromebooks and you know that those screens are small, um, avoid cramming too much text onto one slide. Um, Having multiple slides is not really a bad thing, especially if you can, group your information, a couple of bullet points per slide. That's probably the best thing to do, is to limit um, putting too much on one slide. Again, the minimum size text for a presentation should be no smaller than 32. And then the minimum size text for a document or email should be no smaller than 12. Um, Again, when you take into uh, when you take in the context of what you're creating and where it will be used, you can have a little bit of play there. But especially with a document or something that's going to be printed, you don't want it smaller than 12, because then it's less likely that the wide audience that you want to reach will be able to read that information.
So, let's talk about some of the issues with color contrast. We do have all sorts of barriers that we can consider in this area. We may have red, green, blue deficiencies, or different degrees of it, and then also the true color blindness at play. And the even bigger difficulty with this is that a lot of times, especially if you work with younger children, they may or may not even be aware that that's an issue. As far as they're concerned, that's how everybody perceives colors, right? Um, if they've never experienced the color red as red, they don't know that other people see it differently than they do. So when you use color, keep that in mind. And these are the most often seen issues with red, green, and blue. But that's not to say that other colors may not be affected. So that's why we always recommend that you don't use color only to convey meaning, because that color may not be perceived as you perceive it.
So anybody recognize, can anybody read the numbers or the number that's in this circular in the dot pattern there? I'm
Yes,
curious.
that is a good exercise. Somebody said
Oh, okay.
74. Okay. Somebody said 84, 21,
Y'all's
74.
color vision is better than mine because I know that there are numbers there, but I can't distinguish them. So, yeah, I don't know if this is familiar to anyone, but when they're testing color uh, for issues with color vision, um, this is one of the things that the optometrist or ophthalmologist might pull out. But I've been told the number is 74. Is that right, Madeline?
Yes.
Now I can cheat. Um,
Yes, the number is 74. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of your children may not even know
they
that
might
they're
not be able to hear.
struggling with this. So, this would be a fun exercise, right, in your classroom, just to see. I don't think we've had everybody here. We've got different types of responses. Oh, not everybody said 74. So this is a good tool
Mhm.
to kind of keep in mind.
So make sure you're choosing good colors. Anything that is indicated by color needs to have a secondary way for it to be distinguished. For example, underlining links. Links are always blue, but they're also always underlined. So if someone couldn't see that particular shade of blue, or maybe it was a link that was clicked on and somebody is using the device um, after that person, and they're looking at the same uh, presentation, or it shows like the link as a different color that it's been clicked on, they can tell it's a link because it's underlined. Um, Also, for text to be really readable, you need to make sure that that all of the elements that you have on the screen can be easily distinguished from the background. So going back to that first image we looked at with the football team advertisement for their first practice, um, you really couldn't see the information very well because the background was an image. Um, an easy fix to that would be just put a plain color block behind the text. and that would set some good contrast. The background wouldn't be bleeding through, and it would make the text easier to read. So simple things like that, making intentional choices about your color contrast will really help people with visual disabilities to take in your content.
So let's talk about supporting tools. I mentioned earlier some assistive technology. Um, when we talk about vision and vision barriers, we consider screen readers, um, and other things like zoom features and color overlays and other
Mhm.
built-in tools. What I didn't talk about earlier when I talked about text to speech, and I want to make sure I say this, is make sure you use these appropriately when it comes to text to speech versus screen readers. Screen readers are designed to read everything on the screen because they're assuming that the user cannot see the screen, right? So they will read actions that you take, anything you click on, a drop down menu, and whatever links you have in that drop down menu, so they can choose from them. So you will hear a lot when you turn on a screen reader. That can be overwhelming for somebody that is not a typical screen reader user, that is not used to hearing all of that information, right? Tab open, drop down, this, that, whatever you're doing on that screen, whatever your mouse clicks on, you will hear that read back to you as an action. Um, Not everybody needs that. You may have kids that simply have low vision that could just benefit from text to speech. And text to speech is widely different because text to speech, first of all, requires you to be able to see enough to determine what you want to have read to you and be able to select it. So you need to be able to use a mouse, not just to see the text, right? Or to use it, know how to use the keyboard commands if that's accessible to you. So those are two different tools. So keep that in mind, and don't confuse one with the other because they have different uses. Now, both of these have options for you to customize if you need to, or if your children need to, different voices, different speeds, things like that. So keep all those things in mind. For screen readers, as I mentioned, every platform has a built-in screen reader. For Microsoft, it's not Reader. If you've never looked at that, you can go into your settings on your device and pull up ease of access, and you will find it there. Um, Again, I would recommend make sure you know how to turn it off because once you turn it on, it can be overwhelming. Uh, so if you have an iPhone, there's an option there. We have VoiceOver. We have um, other options for Android devices, for Google. We have Chromevox for Google. We have, if you have an Android phone, that's called TalkBack. So you have options for screen readers and text to speech that are built into whatever platform you have. You just need to know it's there and look for it in your settings and you turn it on to see what that experience would be for somebody that is trying to use that screen reader to access your content. So that's a good way to check it. Zoom features, again, they pretty much come preloaded now and on every device. In addition to that, you may have access to other options, both for text to speech or for Zoom features or color overlays or things like that, by the virtue of whatever your district already purchased for everybody. So if you're not aware of what's out there, do a little bit of digging. I promise you, you probably have access to things that you haven't looked at yet. Color overlays. It's a good tool, but it has to be customized. So we cannot assume that a certain color will work for everybody or that it will work at all. This is kind of a trial and error, right? We have to try different things and ask the person that's trying to access if that makes it better or worse, or if it's neutral. So these are things for you to try to navigate through and work on from day one when you have students that you know are struggling in your classroom. There has been success with color overlays to some. It doesn't work for everybody, but then again, nothing works for everybody, right? If it did, we would just give you that recipe, that prescription, and we would all go home. So try different things, customize, ask your students, and then go from there, and you will see a great impact.
All right.
This is the contrast
Yeah.
checker. I wanted to just give you some options. You have, this is an Ames tool, and we'll give you these links. But if you want to check the contrast color on everything you're creating because you're not quite sure that it's working and it's accessible, you have tools that you can use that are free, and this is one of them. Most often than not, I will also say this, you can look at your content and you're pretty much going to be able to tell, unless you have issues with your vision. And that would probably make it even better because this way you can actually see what the barriers are and fix them before you put this out there. But you can pretty much look at your content and tell if there's sufficient contrast or not, most often than not, right? We practiced that earlier at the beginning of the session. But if you need, for whatever reason, to check your contrast with a tool or to make sure you match the exact shade of color on a different page or in a different document, whatever the case may be, you do have these tools available.
And there are multiples. This is just one that we use fairly often, but there are like many different free color contrast checkers out there. You can also, if your student may need to adjust the display settings on their laptop. I like to use dark mode for a lot of my, like for Teams, for Word documents and things, just because it makes it easier for me to see all the little tabs and buttons and options that I have control over. Because it turns the background black and any of the buttons and controls turns their text white. It's just a lot easier for me to see that way. You can adjust that per, uh, you know, per application, or you can adjust it for your whole computer. You just go to display, and then you can adjust the brightness. If you scroll down, then you'll be able to see where you can turn on dark mode, and that will adjust everything.
And before you move on to that one, can you go back up for a second? I want to point out the nightlight option. You can turn that on and you can schedule that to come on and off on your schedule or the child's schedule. This, even if you don't turn background to dark background as an option, you can at least offer some eye protection because what this does is it takes out those bluish tones from your screen, and it helps, especially somebody that struggles, that have dry eyes, anybody benefits from this. So that little toggle there allows you to do that. So I wanted you to know that's there too. Also for magnification, I talked about zoom options a little bit ago. You do have that option too to use a magnifier. This is also in Microsoft. All of these are on a PC. All these screenshots were taken out of Ease of Access, as you see there. So you go into your accessibility settings, Ease of Access, and you get all these options that you can customize. So for the magnifier, you can turn that on from here. And as you see, it's set on 200%, but you can set that as whatever you need, and it's going to open your page for that, whatever value you put there. So you do have all these options built in. Also, another valuable tool that I personally use that I want to point out is the mouse pointer and text cursor. If you have any issues, even if you have if your eyes are strained at the end of the day and you feel like you can't focus on that small tiny mouse pointer, or it's finding it hard to find on the screen, or you have multiple screens and then it's really difficult to find it on the screen, right? You can make that larger and you can change the color of it so you can see it a lot easier. Somebody's confirming that that's a good option. So you can turn that whatever color you want. You can put a border around it so you can really see it. There is also an option to set up your pointer to pulsate basically on your screen when you hit the tab or the control button. So in other words, if you have a large screen or two screens and you're struggling to find that mouse and what screen is it on, then you'll be able to press that tab and it will show you where the mouse is. It'd be easier to see it. So there is so much already here that I really urge you to explore that tab one by one and really look at what the options are, because your children could benefit from that. You may find those helpful too. I know I use a lot of them. So just take a look. If you have any questions, shoot us an email.
Oh, yeah. In Google, uh, the best way to make sure that your documents and slides are compatible with any screen magnifiers or screen readers is to make sure that you've checked those boxes uh, under the accessibility menu. Make sure that you have turned those on so that anyone using those slides or documents doesn't have to ask you to turn that on. It's already on there. We are going to have some upcoming trainings. February 27th, we will have the United States Department of Ed, Office of Civil Rights Attorney, sharing how to make websites accessible, specifically for administrators and web developers. We will also, I don't have the other one on there. February 13th and 14th. You guys, everybody should have gotten this in their email. We will be hosting a free 2-day virtual training with WebAIM. They are excellent trainers on digital accessibility. They'll be going over documents, presentations, uh, teaching through Zoom, things to know about accessibility in all of those areas. And they'll also be covering Google Suites, and so like Google Docs and Google Slides as well. Also, April 18th, we will be doing our third session in this series, Point of Action for Hearing Barriers. And March 12th, we'll be in person at the AT Expo, doing a session on the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. And then we were able to provide an in-person session in Lawrence 55 on March 5th, and they have graciously allowed us to open up 15 seats for that in-person training. It's going to be on how to make sure your creations in Canva are accessible. And all of the registrations for this are on the website, and I'll post the link in the chat in just a moment. I'm going to stop the recording.